It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners, and welcome once again to Hard Hats and High Vis. We are now in week 12. We've covered the election and we're moving beyond into that post space. And I just want to remind listeners who are listening to the show, drop us a line, give us some feedback, and we'd be more than happy to raise these sorts of things in the show. I do have a couple up my sleeve at the moment for our Around the World show, and particularly in energy policy. But we'll deal with those in our next week's show. But yeah, I do remind people, if you do enjoy what you're listening, give us a good review on your podcast app, and drop me a line on Jack the Insider, on @JackTheInsider on Twitter, or you can drop me a line on the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com. G'day, Jack. How are things in Hong Kong today, mate? Nice and sunny? Bit sticky? Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, it's warm.
No, we actually got some good stuff, but it relates more to the
and listeners, don't worry, we won't be triggered.
The Around the World show. So we will be covering those on Friday, Jack. For now, we are looking at the domestic politics and social and cultural matters arising. And the PM, Anthony Albanese, has started off by picking a fight with the crossbenchers. And their staff have been instructed to reduce the number of staff that they will have, with the number of advisors down from 4 to 1. So staff of 5 for the crossbenchers. 4 of those are administrative staff, and 1 will be a policy advisor who can fly around with the crossbenchers, fly around the country and add his or her 2 bob's worth. And this is a reduction of 3 advisors that was laid down for the crossbenchers by Scott Morrison. Is it a good time for Albo to be picking, or good fight for Albo to be having?
I'm not sure he's picking a fight. I just think they were looking at the staffing levels in
that's exactly what I thought.
And said, that's enough for you. You're getting twice what an ordinary back.
These arrangements that were made in the Morrison government were very much, it was indeed a bribe. So
we're just a bit of a bribe.
Indeed it was. That was it. So have
a political
the
bribe, but a bribe nevertheless.
Independents, including the 9 teals. Well, I think there are 3 existing teals who have been re-elected. The 6 new teals. Have they gone around and said to their mates, "I've got a job for you"? Have they overcommitted?
Do you mean have they allocated these jobs before they were told how many they were going to get? I suspect they have.
Yeah, Monique Ryan.
They certainly seem to have a well-developed sense of entitlement for people who haven't even been sworn in.
Believe this was the first fight the Prime Minister wanted to pick. She thinks he wants a brawl. Albo did. That's what Chris Flannery used to say, mate.
They think they're koalas.
Albo said today that he was receiving more conciliatory messages behind closed doors than are currently being expressed in the media. Jacqui Lambie network, I think 1 or 2 now. I think Jackie's got a +1 now. Most upset. And the UAP kitty who we talked about on the Conditional Release Program yesterday, Babbitt, he's jumping up and down too. I just get the feeling they've actually employed who actually sent out the job forms. Come and join me in Canberra.
They have promised a job. Just for a bit of historical perspective, a very good dear friend of ours who sadly died earlier this year, Russ Badham.
Harry Garrick.
He was the first person I knew well who was an advisor to an MP. The late Harry Garrick, who was the member for Northcote. It wasn't called North, it was Batman. It was called Batman, yeah. And at that stage, Horry had a staff of two. There was a secretary who used to man the phones and do the typing in the office in High Street in Northcote, and there was Badham. And when Parliament was sitting, generally but not always, Badham would hop on the burner with Horry, and they'd go up to Canberra together.
In the old Parliament House. I remember being in the office. It was tiny.
And that's pretty much all you need.
If you moved around, you knocked something over.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, listeners, if you get a chance, go to the old Parliament House in Canberra and look how compact
currently
the whole setup was. The Prime Minister's office is tiny, and have a look in what was the press room. They were all jammed in there. There's no space.
It's a room for 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of. I've seen the Guardians and the Australians, of course, and they're all cramped in there. There's not a lot of privacy to be had for the media with their colleagues anyway. They're all sort of cramped in there in their little areas.
Yeah. Anyway, my take on this politically is that this is a losing play for the Teals.
Threatening a strike.
Look entitled. David Pocock
threatening a strike. Can you imagine how that would look?
Got there yet,
a
son,
strike
and
in the Senate
demanding
from the crossbenchers.
Yeah.
How would that look? So he did make somewhat more conciliatory remarks. He said it would probably not be a strike; it would be a go slow.
Yeah.
Well, seriously, in the Senate, how would you know? How would you know the difference?
Okay.
Dear. Yeah, look, it's not a political move. It's
It'd
just
be after lunch, that means.
It's not designed necessarily to cause a ruction. It's just them saying, well, you're still getting more than the backbenchers. We understand you might have. Well, it would have been on the 4 and 4, but I suspect what will happen is they'll go to 4 and 2 and negotiate, and everyone will come away a winner. I think that's what will happen. But the 4 and 4 was a Morrison edifice, and they've all got used to it. But really, if you're a crossbencher, how many advisors do you need? Really, I mean, sooner or later you're going to have to make your own mind up. And they've got access to the parliamentary library, Jack, which Labor are going to boost some funding to, so they could spend some time in that, particularly if they're on a go slow.
Yep.
Yeah. House of Mirrors, stand up and have a good look at
So
yourself.
Teals, have a good look in the mirror and say, is this a winning move or not? And it's not.
Labor government's policies. And we're talking really with the introduction of up to 20 weeks of Commonwealth-funded paid paternity leave for men to assist in the first 2 years of a child's life. And Labor are commencing discussions with business on how to encourage more fathers to stay at home and look after young children. Good move or bad, Jack? Yeah.
I don't really care whether
there
it's
are
the father or the mother who stays at home. I personally think that's a matter for families to work out amongst themselves.
Early childhood parenting roles are shared, particularly in the first few weeks, that you have a more sort of equal arrangement on who does what. Rather than, let's say, the mother staying at home for a period of 3-6 months and dad going off to work. So there are some sensible things here. Many countries have it, of course.
Well, except that how families and couples split the housework isn't really a government responsibility. The government shouldn't be getting involved in that. My view, you take away the distinction between primary and secondary caregivers, have however much family leave that you're going to allow, 20 weeks or whatever it is, and allow the family to split it up however they want and go on and get on and organise their own.
Yeah, look, I understand that.
Dishwashing rota and their laundry rota amongst themselves. That's not a matter for government.
Up to 20 weeks of paid parental leave in the first 2 years of a child's life, so it's not taken as a slab in immediate postnatal sense. Then you probably do have better households, Jack, with a better split on who does what.
Well, people within families make those choices for all sorts of reasons. Some of them are economic. One or the other might be the big money earner.
Well, it could be both.
They need to have
I think
that
that's
person,
what they're saying is it could be
keeping
both.
that
And what you're
full-time
doing
job.
with
Could be
the
a man,
20
could be a
weeks.
woman. Could be either. Could be both. Yeah. But what the government should do is take away the primary and secondary distinction,
but basically,
and then
what
leave
I'm
the
saying
rest of it
the government
to
is
the
trying to
family
do
work
this
out
so
themselves.
they will take the economics out of it. That there will be paid parental leave at a reasonable rate. We haven't discussed the rate yet, and the government hasn't announced what that rate will be. But take the economics out of it so households can make their decisions, and also get men a little bit more involved in that early postnatal family arrangements.
Look, well, I know some excellent fathers who were not much good.
Yeah,
in
look,
the
when
first,
my first was born,
years, but turned into excellent fathers.
Sort of
and look, that's
from
something
about
families work out for
third month
themselves.
onwards for a period of about the next 6 months because Jenny was flat out at work, and it kind of worked out. But and it was great. I mean, I formed a bond with my daughter that'll never be broken. But in the end, I think, when I look back at it now, I said probably the mother, would have been better off at that particular period in a child's development. Might have been better off with her mother, but it just wasn't the way we could do it economically. And now, I guess what the government is trying to do is take economics out of it, so you can get more support behind young parents.
Yeah, well, it sort of varies a bit. I've got a relative of mine who's, something she's not quite 4, but you can already read the form guide because her dad was
those
looking
are
after
important
her
skills to learn.
years.
Albo is travelling again. He's in Madrid at the moment with a NATO meeting.
Yeah, they are indeed.
Made some statements there about unified NATO, unified Europe. Maintaining the pressure on Russia is the only way to go, which is kind of a fairly obvious remark. Why is he at NATO, Jack? I think we touched on this last week, but he was invited, of course, and it would have been churlish to decline. Yeah, that's what we did talk about last week, and as you said, Richard Marles, the deputy.
Well, why is he at NATO and not CHOGM?
With the CHOGM meeting.
Or was he in Kigali? I think the CHOGM's over, but yeah. Look, we tipped in a fair bit of dough into the NATO current exercise with Ukraine, so I suppose that's why we're invited and we're entitled to be there, and it's probably a good thing that he is. It's an important there are important decisions to be made around what NATO does over the next few months. I saw that there is at least an illusion of unity amongst them, but I don't know
talked about
how
this
strong
too. Is it a bad idea that PMs travel a lot? I don't think that
it's
it
not
is.
a bad thing that we're there.
Particularly a new PM, I think, has got to get around and be known face to face with the world's leaders.
So it depends what they do. I think it was a particularly bad look to have Gough Whitlam more or less leading a cultural tour to Greece at the time, having people walking up and down the Acropolis with him.
Not what you can do about that. And he did hurry back. It wasn't, it wasn't Scott Morrison sitting on the beach at Waikiki.
That wasn't.
I mean, although those allusions were made.
No, he didn't. Gough didn't come back.
Yeah. Look,
Gough didn't come back very quickly, and it was very unpopular.
So far,
so there you go.
Albanese's
Depends what they're doing
really just
over
meet
there.
and greet. I am the new Prime Minister of Australia. They're quite important. One thing Albo will be going to is he'll be going to Fiji next week for the Pacific Island Forum. And there he will meet the Prime Minister of the Solomons, Sogavare, for Prime Minister Sogavare for further meetings on the yet to be made public secret arrangements with China that he's made.
He did. I think the Pacific Islands Forum, they go back to about 1970, 71, I think. And my recollection is, what used to happen was that the prime ministers of everywhere else, New Zealand and all of the Pacific states would turn up, and Australia would send the chap who was then known as the Minister for External Territories along, who I think in 71 probably would have still been Paul Hasluck.
That was worthwhile, and
we'd go along
I'm not
there.
So much referring to
they've been going a long time. I think they're
days of
worthwhile.
those arrangements, but
it's a good.
I remember it was John Howard's first overseas trip. Was to the Pacific. May not have been the first, but it was very early days in John Howard's prime ministership, and he declined the kava, had a cup of tea instead. We thought it was an outrageous drug. It's not much of a drink. I remember having some
I'm
Fiji,
with him on that.
It's like drinking,
it's
like
not
drinking
much
very
of a
muddy
drink,
water,
the kava.
Jack. It's not all that pleasant, and it doesn't have any sort of psychoactive effect. It was very disappointing on that level too. But
yes. Very
there
disappointing.
Was some really serious body language.
I'm with John Howard. A cup of tea
from that
a better choice
meeting,
than a
and it's gone on since. That Australia has, perhaps this is one of the reasons for Sogavare turning to the Chinese, that the Australians have treated the Pacific Islands like a little bit beneath them over the years.
Probably that's right. I think that's probably a fair criticism. We've always sent, I know of some good people who are sent up there as diplomats, etc. But there have been some incidents where people have been put on camera saying things that they probably shouldn't.
Probably a little bit paternalistic as well, was to have Big Kim Beazley and the Minister for Defence, Robert Ray, two large human beings, pop over to Fiji and elsewhere, and they were celebrated. Where being a large human is a sort of point of celebration. Large male, that is a point of celebration in the Pacific. He's really says, he slimmed down.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid Albo's going to let the team down there in that regard these days. The new Albo, he slimmed down. Yes, I noticed he was hopping on the plane with the skinny pants on.
See if he has a scoff of the kava. Yeah, well, they will have the Hawaiian on.
He's going to look a little bit. He's going to look a little bit underdone when they put the silly shirt on, isn't it?
I mean, in all seriousness, the South Pacific is basically Australia's sphere of influence. It's about as far as we can go as an individual nation. I'm not talking about our relationship with the United States or perhaps even New Zealand. But in terms of a sphere of influence, that's, all the way almost to Hawaii is where we can go. And
Well, personally, I think we have much more influence than that. Much more influence than what you're suggesting. I think we have a fair bit of influence in Southeast Asia and South Asia, but in the Pacific, we're the biggest. We're the biggest security force in that area. So we do have a bit more
a friendship or a series of sort of alliances with South Pacific nations that have only just been tested when the South Pacific's gone through difficult times with weather events and those sorts of things, and that's when Australia's come to the fore. We always do, but it might be better to. Because a lot of the things that Fiji, in particular, want to talk about, Jack, is climate change and responses to it. Because a lot of these countries, as you know, are disappearing. Well, it certainly is when you get to the Micronesian Federation. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
No, it's not even. It's not even true. There, nothing is disappearing. None of the.
What do you mean? I mean, you're actually looking at reduced land mass. I mean, that's basically what you're looking at.
Saying so?
We're not talking about storm events. We are talking about water lapping in and actually affecting groundwater on these island nations, so they will not have free. We are talking about the prospect of refugees having to come to this country because they simply won't be able to. Yeah, well, that's the
I can see why the island states are saying that, because they've got their hand out looking for a handout.
We'll introduce some geography to you.
There isn't the science to back this up.
From the South Pacific.
I'll have a look at it.
And I'll show you how their land mass has reduced. It's not up, but it's
the land masses in the South Pacific are always going up and down because of the nature of the islands. They're coral keys by and large.
If you'd want to contest it, but we'll look at this next week and we'll show you, in particular, some islands that are really desperate at the moment. Yeah. Well, no, it's not what I think. We'll show you some data.
Podcast on a terribly visual medium.
Well, here we go. Next thing, Jack. Climate protests. Didn't see you chain yourself to the...
Will this be like
ice in the Arctic? You do realise the reduction that's gone on there too, don't you? You're actually looking at Bering Sea being uncluttered for long periods of time.
No, it hasn't happened.
I mean, just flying over it, mate, looking down at it and seeing it as white is not data.
No.
Climate protests, meanwhile, Jack,
not even massive things disappearing. So there you go.
In Hong Kong, but it did happen in Sydney. Someone actually locked themselves to their steering wheel outside the entrance to the harbour tunnel, closing that for a while. She actually streamed the protest, and it featured a very angry motorist confronting her, and she's sitting there rather calmly dealing with it. She was ultimately arrested. And it's part of what's called Blockade Australia Group, and they are protesting throughout the streets of Sydney this week. Kicked off again this morning.
What a derivative bunch they are. They're just pinching ideas from the television from what's happening in the UK. They can't even think of something original for themselves.
And we're making chants, that have been chanted from other protesters. Yeah, this one, I guess the insinuation is that this is a global group, and this is just the Australian representation of it. We did have some unseemly business occurring around the Colo River, not far out of Sydney, where I think the Blockade Australia group had gathered to training, and the Wallopers made a very poor effort of trying to disguise themselves and ended up having a confrontation with them. Everyone has a right to protest, Jack. They do. Yeah, the problem I've got with that Jacqui, is that if
They
you're going to
do.
just have
What
a
they
wander
don't have the right
through
to do is
the
stop
streets in a
everybody
way
else
that's not
going
going to
about their
affect
business.
traffic, it's not really a protest, is it? I understand what you're saying, and if I was stuck in traffic, I'd be filthy, right? Don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is there is this conflict, and this is the Environment Minister. I should just go on to quote her. The Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, perhaps given the card from under the deck there at the bottom of the deck, is now the Environment Minister. She said that she did say that. Yeah, so she is. Yeah, she is pleased to get it.
She was pleased to get the job. She said so.
People have the right to protest, as we've agreed.
And she looked very nearly
anyone
sincere when she said.
participating in rallies needed to do so within the law. I don't think it's unreasonable to make sure that people are safe and protesting within the law. I understand people feel strongly, but you've also got a right to make your views publicly known. You don't have a right to break the law while you're doing it. There have been a number of arrests. I think 11 arrests.
These groups are the same all around the world.
Well, that's not a crime.
Where they do this blockade stuff. They are overwhelmingly white, and they are overwhelmingly well off. No, it's not. But let's just bear this in mind. These are the people who can afford to worry about these things.
I understand that.
The people who are struggling to get to work.
And what I'm talking about is the conflict between the right to protest.
It's a luxury protest.
And what the governments insist is the right to do so lawfully. And really there is those things are in direct conflict. Whether it was anti-lockdown protesters, they were engaging in what was illegal activity, and most of them were never arrested, and a few of them were issued infringement notices and all this sort of stuff. Here we've got people stopping traffic, blocking roads.
This has been happening. This has been happening since the G20 in Melbourne. That was 15 years ago. When all these people decided to try and stop the various leaders of foreign governments from getting in and out of buildings and all that sort of stuff, right? A lot of them got arrested.
Yeah, I remember that.
Almost none of them suffered any consequences. In the end, they sued the police because the police arrested them, and the courts gave them the verdict. This is just wrong. You're allowed to protest. What you're not allowed to do is to break the law and prevent everybody else.
I understand perfectly, but what I'm saying is,
I don't care what your
run
cause
a
is.
protest and
that
not
shouldn't be
break
allowed.
the law, then that's not really a protest at all. I mean, that's just a march where the police have been obliged to close the streets, to close a particular streets, and guide protesters through. These are fairly common sort of scenes that we see in protests. But isn't that causing disruption, traffic snarls and so forth?
To me, that's a protest. To me, that's absolutely okay as a protest. Well, generally speaking, you've got to make the arrangement with the police beforehand, and that's doable. What I'm talking about is this sort of stuff. I don't care what your cause is. Blockading the harbour tunnel, blockading streets, all that, sticking yourself to pavements, all of that's wrong.
Yeah.
Should be punished.
I simply can't agree with that. I just don't know.
Well, certainly, yes.
You are always going to have this implicit conflict between what a protest do and what
jail
is
terms for repeat
lawful.
offenders.
There's always going to be that conflict, and that's the same with the anti-lockdown guys in the last year and the year before.
And what I'm saying is we've gone too far to give the protesters too much space,
and that was from
too much freedom to disrupt other people.
I don't think there's too much argument about that. But then we do get these sort of issues where, and I know that one fellow, and this is not part of the Blockade Australia group, but this was part of an anti-lockdown protest where a police officer reached for his phone while he was filming, and he pushed the police officer's hand back, and he's now been charged with assault police. It gets messy, doesn't it? It gets so messy.
Well, I think that's a bit weak. That's a bit weak. What about the people in the UK who were clambering on top of the tube trains
my
to
point
prevent people
is
from going to
that
work?
protests are about disruption.
That should be a hefty
Otherwise,
fine,
there's not much point having them. And that's why you've got this innate conflict all the time. Yeah, now
this is something new. It didn't used to happen. Protests used to be about just making your point.
Australia, they're here all week. Let's say, try the veal.
And to me, that's wrong.
But we've seen this with protests from anti-lockdown protests, for example, when they go out for a march and then they stay outside the Parliament for the next 3 months. Yeah, okay, all right. John Barrelaro, Jack, you must have read this. This is fantastic, isn't it? This is the sort of stuff that brings governments down, isn't it?
Well, it certainly embarrasses governments. I wouldn't mind being trade
I
commissioner.
think that's the point. I mean, basically everyone wants this job.
I'd rather
it's
like
one of the
living in
biggest
York.
drinks trolleys you've ever seen in your life, basically $500K a year plus everything. He will not put his hand in his pocket. If he went out to buy himself a coffee and a packet of chewing gum, he'd expect to get money back from it. The point around this job, we'll talk about whether New South Wales actually needs a trade commissioner in New York City, and I think we'll find that it really doesn't. But also that this was this $500K a year job that you and I would both love and put our hands up, and we didn't get a tap on the shoulder in the global search. I would give it to us, Jack, because
I would
Barrels has
prefer to say
got
I would
it.
reluctantly
And this was
accept it
after
just to be
a global
service to New
search
South
was
Wales.
conducted that found two very, very good candidates. They're both by name, two very, very good candidates. I don't really want to name them because, I think their privacy's been interrupted a bit here. But then the New South Wales bureaucracy turned around and said, "Barrels, you're our man." We've scanned the globe looking for an appropriate person to be the New South Wales Trade Commissioner in New York City. And look, here you are. Here you've been just under, right next door. We scanned the globe and then we came across you.
Yeah, I'm always a bit dubious about these global search thingos. Like the AFL are doing one for the next
corporation.
CEO,
and corporations
it'll be
can
someone.
do these sorts of things.
It's a global search, and it'll be someone from within the AFL. So who cares? Yeah. My view of who should get the job for the New South Wales Trade Commission in New York City, it's entirely a matter for the government, and they should appoint. The cabinet should appoint.
Bob Carr was on Twitter saying that this was worse than Terry Metherell, where Terry Metherell was given a government position by the Greiner government that was ultimately determined to be technically corrupt and ultimately cost Nick Greiner his job as Premier. Well, he created it,
Only because we have the foolish ICAC system.
No one else to blame but himself.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Well, he and Gary. He and Gary Sturgis put it together. Yeah, that's true.
Definition of irony.
They came up to Hong Kong and modelled it on our ICAC system, which is not very good either.
Terry Metherell.
And the appointment of Terry Metherell was political, but governments make political choices. And if the government wants to give John Barillo the job in New York City, in my view, they're perfectly entitled to do so. There may be a political cost.
Bob Carr made a very,
I think there probably would be,
reference to Terry Metherell that ultimately cost Greiner his job. But he advised further the New South Wales Labor look in their tactics, and they can actually request the opposition can actually request data on how much business is going through the Trade Commissioner's office in New York City, which should be hilarious, and report to the Parliament on a monthly basis. Because right now, this is a new position, by the way. This didn't exist a year ago. So it's going to be like, okay, well, what business have you got coming into New South Wales from New York City while John Barrels has been there? And I think that
yeah, well, that's a political cost. But government's got to be allowed to make political choices, and then have to bear the political cost. But they shouldn't need a global search. It shouldn't have to be some special committee of people who choose who gets this job.
There is an inquiry now.
But they might bear a political cost for it.
And that inquiry will involve senior bureaucrats, including Michael Coots-Trotter.
Michael Coots-Trotter has appointed a former public service commissioner to do the job, a bloke called Graham Head, I've never heard of. But
report is
so Coots-Trotter's pushed it down the line.
In a hurry and probably won't contain too many gremlins. But well, it seems to be a very courageous.
I understand Sir Humphrey Alboi was approached.
I just wonder. I mean, it does leave Labor open to using these sorts of tactics by reporting to the Parliament and to the media on just exactly what Barilaro's up to on any given day. Yeah. It's going to be a beauty.
Well, that's just a political cost you pay if you make a political choice. I mean, this is not the worst.
That's still the yardstick.
Appointment I've ever seen. I think Vince Gare to
no, it's a beauty. It is a beauty though, because we all know that Barrels was an unashamed pork barrel. That's where his nickname comes from, and it's just amusing to most of us to see that he walked away from politics and everyone said lovely words about him, and then within days he was appointed to the New South Wales Trade Commissioner in New York City. Will it bring the Perrottet government down? Probably not. What it will do is create a sort of, if Labor are any good at bringing these matters to the attention, keeping this matter rolling.
What might bring the Perrottet government down is that they've got
he's very
long last, first time for quite a while. We've got a Labor leader in New South Wales who looks
a first priority item, just to keep this rolling and creating that perception around the Perrottet government that it's all about jobs for boys and entitlement. Everyone else got to tighten their belts. Public service increases for wages for police and ambos and fireys. Oh no, we can't go anywhere near the inflation rate, but Barrels can pick up $500,000 a year, and that's what they've got to do. So yeah, Chris has got the job ahead of him there. He's doing a pretty good job. He's Chris Mintz is doing an actually fantastic job, and it is game on next year when the people in New South Wales go to the polling booth. In Victoria, Dan Andrews has banned the swastika, and it just went straight through the Parliament with bipartisan support. Only one person not voting for it, and that was the Liberal Democrats' Kitty in the upper house. It seems to have involved a great deal of community consultation, particularly with the Jewish community in Victoria, it basically criminalises the display of the swastika in public with, I think, a $22,000 fine and a year in prison or both. What does it achieve? Yeah, but why have other countries in Europe banned the swastika, Jack?
Not much.
The French? The Austrians?
Well, I can see why the Germans have.
The UK don't.
Well, it varies a bit. The Spanish don't, and I don't think the Dutch don't.
Look, we did
the
talk
UK does
on the
it.
Conditional
I'm not
Release
much of a
program
one for
yesterday
banning stuff.
about
Is my view. I think it's all a bit subjective.
not in England.
Does Prince Harry get a year in
Not in
jail
England,
for wearing
but
a Nazi
in Victoria,
uniform to
the Liberals have got
a dress-up party? You know? But would he if he did it in Melbourne?
government has got legislation that has been through a parliamentary committee, which is designed to ban Nazi symbols full stop, which is a difficult one because a lot of the symbols are heavily coded and sort of secretive, and it would require a fair bit of training.
Do we ban symbols from
I
the
don't
former
think we want to
Soviet
get into the
Union or
comparative
from,
stuff.
Maoist China? We don't,
that
do
would
we?
be the particularly unpleasant element of Nazism is that it identified one racial group and sought to persecute them and kill them in the millions. And that's why we don't have it. It's the rise of anti-Semitism that's the problem. And
well, I don't think that there is a problem with the rise of anti-Semitism, but I don't think that that's got anything to do with displaying swastikas. To be quite honest, the rise of anti-Semitism is much broader than that, and it's not. The anti-Semitic attacks that are happening in the United States now are not being done by white supremacist or far right people. They've been done
let's go through some stats.
They are being done almost entirely in
Tel Aviv
by the
University stats. Is the Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report of 2021. In the US, this is for 2021 alone. The US, which has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, the number of anti-Jewish hate crimes recorded in both New York and Los Angeles were almost twice that of the previous year. In France, the number of recorded anti-Semitic incidents increased by almost 75% compared with 2020. In Canada, a leading Jewish group reported a 40-year record in anti-Semitic physical violence in 1 month. That was August of last year. In the UK, the number of recorded physical assaults against Jews increased by 78% compared with 2020. In Germany, anti-Semitic incidents recorded by police were up 29% compared with 2020.
Yep, the numbers are going up, but who's doing it?
In Australia, we've also experienced a sharp rise in recorded anti-Semitic incidents, with 88 in May alone. The report goes on to explain that some of this, particularly the Australian reference there, was related to Israel and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip, kicking off there with 261 people killed in Gaza and 14 people killed in Israel. They acknowledge that, but they also acknowledge that there's a great deal of proliferation, left and right, Jack. I'm not arguing with you about that at all, but there is a great deal of proliferation on the dark web in some hidden parts of or more clandestine parts of social media.
It's actually. Going to stop you. It's actually worse than you describe it. Jews are fleeing parts of Europe, right? Jews are fleeing Sweden, and they're fleeing Paris. One of the reasons we've got so many new French people in Hong Kong is quite a lot of them are Jewish, because they don't want to live in Paris, they don't want to live in Malmo.
Yeah, so I fully accept that banning a swastika
and they're fleeing for a particular reason. They've got a demographic
might
problem.
even argue that it's empty.
But
what it does do is basically bury that bloody horrible symbol, and also because it criminalises it, and allows us to keep a little bit better eye on emerging extreme right-wing groups who've fallen into sort of Nazism. Well, I don't think Dan Andrews...
whilst doing nothing about the real cause of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe, which
I don't think that's part of Dan Andrews'
the rise,
brief,
the rise of unassimilated.
Certainly, a ban of the
Islamic
swastika, you might, I guess, argue that hasn't done much for... I mean, it is banned in France, it is banned in Germany, it is banned in Austria. It hasn't done much to reduce anti-Semitism. The report makes really stark reading. Some of it is linked to conflict in the Gaza and perceptions about Israeli overreach in the Gaza, but a lot of it is driven by extremist groups, neo-Nazi groups that exist here in Australia and have for a long time in one form or another, and just having that ban on the swastika is, well, it certainly gives the Australian Jewish Council a great deal of comfort. It means at very base level that people who've survived the Holocaust and their descendants don't have to be mocked by people carrying swastikas. It also means that our veterans in World War II who fought in North Africa don't have to be mocked by swastikas either.
Well, I'm not a fan of people carrying swastikas. I don't think banning it does anything. You and I both lived for a long time in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. You can't drive past a synagogue in the eastern suburbs of Sydney or a Jewish school without seeing armed guards out the front.
I'd suggest it's got the rise of extreme left and extreme right groups. And by having a ban on swastikas, it actually at least politicises and takes away this nonsense that it is free political speech, and it allows police to engage and remove people for sort of mocking Jewish people with swastikas. It's a start.
Well, I would be more impressed with Dan Andrews if he addressed the causes of why we've got to have armed guards outside synagogues and Jewish schools. They're the only religious group and the only religious schools that this is required of in Australia. But they
have armed guards? Where do they have armed guards?
I would be much more impressed
if
you addressed the causes of that. And I don't think banning swastikas is doing that.
I'll have a look into it and get back to you next week. All right.
They do indeed. Yep.
I have seen them at some of the Bondi schools.
And they have in Sydney since,
right now. I have seen them.
Since I moved to Sydney in 1994, they've had them. Mariah College has a group of people at the front every morning, special requirement to get in and out and all that sort of stuff. And every synagogue in Sydney has them.
You know, the right-wing extremists are growing here. What we always see, and that is just a statistical fact that ASIO will be happy to nod along with, what we do see is in those groups, extreme left, extreme right, once you dig far enough, you will find, and dig down in those groups far enough, you'll find anti-Semitism just raw and raring to go. Yeah, well, mate, we do have these ridiculous things.
Very far to find it on the left these days.
I understand perfectly what you're saying. A lot of it is driven by that. The Labor Party in the UK has got significant problems with anti-Semitism still to this day, driven by Corbyn.
The Labor Party in Australia is a little bit better, but not that much better.
It does have difficulties in dealing with matters like conflict in Gaza, and. You know, the point is you don't have to be anti-Semitic to be critical of Israeli policy in Gaza. That doesn't make you an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite if you want to wipe out the Jews, basically. And we are seeing groups in this country who are hell bent on it. There are a number in jail at the moment from the extreme right, Jack. Well, as I say,
and go to
not denied for a moment. It comes from both
a
sides
left march
on
and
the
listen to them
extreme.
say from the river to the
what
sea.
we are seeing is a rise in right-wing extremism and tapping and tapping the footlock of the neo-Nazis. Home ownership in Australia, much gentler topic. The home ownership in Australia, the latest census showed home ownership rates have sunk well below levels seen in the 90s. Mortgage debt has skyrocketed. It's a big topic here now, with a big jump from the Australian Reserve Bank and the official cash rate last month, and already people are talking about mortgage stress. And more families living in apartments than ever before. So the freestanding Australian home is a rarity, much more of a rarity than it was 20 years ago, Jack. Yeah, I've done it too.
I rather like apartment living. I've lived in
Depends
apartments
who's above
for
you.
15 years.
Depends who's above you.
And I suspect I'll never go back to having my own home and happily
not that much fun. That's right. I always did. You know, you'd remember the Hells Angels.
Well, it's not much fun having next door to you a freestanding house. On our way to visit
and there were a couple of houses. You knew that they owned the ones either side. You could pretty much tell because the fences were down and all that sort of stuff. But then there were the houses just that little bit further, and you always looked at them and gone, yeah, there's not much point complaining about the noise, is there? You know, not a lot of point complaining about the noise. Yeah. But at the same time, if you had some motor vehicle issues, maybe
you wouldn't knock on the door asking for borrow a cup of sugar.
And you sort of might have one or two of them obliging. In the old days, the old greybeards, I don't know that the current crop are all that good on their motorbikes, Jack. Yeah. So look, I mean, there's a report in the Herald Sun today about home ownership rates have sunk. So we're not just talking about apartment living. We're talking about this unreachable condition now for many Australians, just simply not being able to get into the housing market. Maybe they will in the next couple of years when conditions, well, the heat will come out of the market now that interest rates are rising. I have to say, when I hear about people with mortgage stress who've recently purchased properties, I have to say, didn't you think this was a possibility? Because when I think about looking at interest rates rising in the middle of last year, you would have to say that it was on the cards and in a fairly significant way, because we're at less than 0.25% official cash rate. That's it.
Yeah, people have been lulled into thinking this is going to last forever. Look, we're just going to have to build more homes.
Local
part of
government
that
stuff. Melbourne's probably better at it than Sydney.
Getting rid of some
if you drive around, out to the western suburbs, there's hardly any of the sort of dual occupancy, the sort of townhouses. Melbourne's been a little bit better at it than Sydney, but they've still got problems. You'll still have heat in the housing market in Melbourne and Sydney and the other capital cities too, for that matter, but to a lesser extent, because, as you say, of the demand exceeding supply.
Now, Jack, I saw the best headline in the Oz that I've seen for ages today, talking about the Queensland government and the lobbyists, where the headline writer suggested that
this is the lobbying
we can still
issue
see where the lumps are.
With Labor Party PR and polling company or affiliated with Hawker Britain. They've basically won the lottery in Queensland, haven't they? They've just licensed to print money.
They are doing very well. I must confess that in my past, I have worked in the lobbying business, but much is made of this. I think some of the rules in Australia certainly need some tidying up. One of the things they were talking about in that article in the Australian was that heads of lobbying companies were working within the ministers' offices during election campaigns. Now, what happens in the UK is that once the election's called, all of those people disappear out of the minister's office and go down to party
I couldn't agree with you more. I saw that and mouth did drop a little bit. It's not quite right. They are in... they're not able to make decisions at that time because an election has been called. They're in caretaker mode, but it's not right.
Yeah. They're in caretaker mode anyway. So get them out of the minister.
Exactly.
Get them out of the minister's
office.
Leads to
get them out
not
of
just
party
headquarters,
but
hire over a couple of floors of an office building somewhere and work from there.
People with, shall we say, a sense of entitlement moving forward. All right. Yeah, very nice work from the subs there.
Anyway, congrats to the Oz for an excellent
there's still a few there. Yeah, the Oz is there's the one newspaper in Australia that can.
You've still got subs there. Oh, that's good.
Jack. Others have them, but they're on contract. But Australia keeps them on, and we still have a small army of subs who are very, very good about ironing out some of my rougher mistakes. On the weekend, Jack, well, before the weekend started, we had the NRL State of Origin women's games, just a one-off. They're not playing the three. The women played, the New South Wales women won 20 to Queensland 14. 600,000 people watched it. And I've got to tell you, I had a bit of flip. I was watching AFL, which is my first love, of course, but I did flip around, and the skill level's excellent. And I'd go so far as to say that the skill level in the NRLW, if that's what they call it, is probably a little bit. The difference between the men and the women is less in the NRL than it is in the AFL. Yeah,
part of that is
kick it far enough.
The AFL to do with kicking.
You've got a lot of women playing the AFLW who have come from other codes, and so kicking is one of those things that you sort of, if you grow up with, you're going to be okay. The difficulty is you put them on a ground like Cardinia Park. It's 200 metres long, you know, and you can only kick the ball 35, 40 metres tops. Well, they bring the fielding.
Look
and it's good.
Women's cricket's gotten since the bats improved. Sure, in all of these women's sports, it was good. It makes it work. That's a problem for the AFL. Anyway, we had the best round of AFL footy I can remember ever.
It promised so much.
I can't
promised so
remember,
much, and it delivered.
Around
you had
every game
you had sides
really carry some importance.
Well, you had 1 and 2 play Thursday night. You had 5 and 3 play Saturday afternoon. Geelong were 4 and Richmond 6 play Saturday in the twilight game at the G. Yeah, they got bundled out.
And the winner, Geelong, looks pretty good to be top 4, and Richmond are temporarily at least out of the 8. So that's a big game.
And the Cats look pretty good. I mean, I still have concerns about their leg speed and hand speed in the midfield. We'll see a bit more about that. Carlton were my mob fantastic against Fremantle. Really was a season engaging win, their best win for the season as declared by me and the coach. Yeah, well, he did agree with me. I thought that was terrific. Good on Voss. He's done a fantastic job.
Oh, I'm glad he agrees with you.
I think he'll be all right.
He'll keep his job. He'll keep his job for a while.
And it is
provided he keeps.
it was declared by one of the football journalists. Carlton were the best ticket in town, Jack. Just a joyful exposition of football, and they are kind of good fun to watch. So I'm very pleased with the Blues at the moment. Sydney absolutely spanked St Kilda, who Carlton play this week. I mean, that was a very poor, did not turn up performance from St Kilda. Sydney Swans still thereabouts, back in the 8, I think back at 6th spot. And Melbourne, I think that's the other sort of take-home message that perhaps people have forgotten. Brisbane, well, I wouldn't say they didn't turn up, but they were just well beaten by Melbourne, who just basically stamped their class on the competition again. Yeah, they've got a pretty as the AFL is
Collingwood got themselves in the 8 with a good run home.
They've got a pretty gentle run home. They play Carlton in the last game of the season. I know that. I'd like to see them just teetering on the 8, just when that moment comes, and then the Blues come and just knock them off. Just make them cry, Jack. Make them cry.
Oh, that's just
I used to go willingly.
Childhood vengeance.
What's wrong with me? But I don't need to go.
Just because you were made to go to Victoria Park.
I'd go when I was 8 or 9 on my own. Mad stuff. Anyway, yeah, no, it was terrific. And the only, I guess, the blemish from it is that the St Kilda defender, Stewart, seemed, he basically ran past the footy and made contact with the head of Dion Prestia and kept Prestia out of the game with concussion and will miss under the concussion rules the next week. And so, mate, this is in the 80s.
Something that would have been called play on when both you and I were running around playing footy.
It's got to go. You can't have it. I mean, for a start, these guys are fitter and faster, so they're going to make more damage.
It's good to see that it's gone.
You run past the ball, people's eyes off the ball, bang. You know, it could be really, really dangerous. So I suspect Stewart, who's said to be absolutely horrified with what had happened, will sort of spend the next month out of football, somewhere around that sort of time frame, I think. Yeah. Look, these things do happen. He's not a dirty player, but he did the wrong thing.
He'll have a few weeks to think about it.
Now, we just wanted to talk about one particular theme. We're just going to touch on it very quickly. The ATAR score, Jack. That's the New South Wales entry to universities, or is that a national standard now? Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's a New South Wales thing, but the Victorians, I think, have a different thing through their Year 12, and it basically gives you that score that will get you into university, and the higher it'll go, the higher the score. The higher you go into sort of lofty places like where you went, Jack, Melbourne University, to do law, and I just struggle. So, I guess what we're trying to say is that there's just so
it took me till I was 25 to get in.
Kids 16, 17 years of age, sometimes 18, going into HSC, their HSC years, sitting exams, having done a fair amount of assessment work, because that's the way the curriculum is structured these days, a fair amount of assessment work in Year 11 and Year 12, external, not externally assessed. There are exams, but these exams still place a great deal of pressure on young kids. Jack, what's your advice to them and their parents?
Well, I'm always amused that people put so much weight on what's going to happen to you when you're 18, like that's going to determine your life.
No, that's right.
It just doesn't work. It does for some
remember them from our own school days, that there were those
people,
kids who were absolutely fixed that they were going to do this, whether it's medicine or law or whatever it was going to be, and nothing would distract them from that pursuit. But that's rare. Yeah, absolutely.
But those people are few in number.
Yeah.
And the ones who actually do what they were going to do are even fewer in number. You know, I mean, so my advice to young people is just don't put that much importance on it. I mean, it's important to try and do well. But it's not the end of the world. It's I have some pleasure in acting as a mentor to young law students at Melbourne Law Now, and even then they'll say, "Oh, I'm a bit worried. I'm not really sure what I want to do when I finish my law degree." And I said, "Well, don't worry about that. There are always some people who started the law degree knowing this is what I'm going to do with it at the end, generally because their dad was a QC or a mum was a QC or a judge or something."
Yeah, I'm glad we brought this up because I think I have a young law student that I'd like you to mentor. She's one of my daughter's friends, and she is like that. She's unsure. She's studying the law, doesn't quite know what she wants to do with it. So we'll work that out a bit. Yeah, I think kids these days are under an extraordinary pressure, and it's often parental that they've got to achieve. They've got to get the highest. Oh, and the schools, absolutely.
Yep,
it's not true.
And from the schools as well. This is going to determine your life, and it's just not true.
Not a clue. If you ever asked me in my mid-20s,
neither you or I really knew what we wanted to do for long after we finished school. Not a clue. Yeah. Well, I sort of fell into the law school at 25 until this is great. I love this, but Well, possibly the world's worst gardener.
I'm Australian.
Before we go, I just want one thing that's not quite a strange.
A couple of suitcases full of cash.
I don't know whether Australia, Prince Charles had a bit of a problem during the week. He did.
Yeah.
The Louis Vuittons
He put it straight through the
were
charity,
stuffed
Jack.
full
It's
of
all
euros by some sheikh in Qatar, and all I could. Yeah, look, I'm sure it's all above board. The only thing that concerned me was I see these photos of all the lost luggage these days,
it's the one with the
I'm
little
just thinking all
HRH
those
on it.
baggage handlers at Heathrow, they'll be going through every bag now,
Look, I probably shouldn't say this, Jack, but if it was anybody else but Prince Charles,
it'd be coming off the private plane as well.
A little bit of money laundering, doesn't it? Dear. The Windsors, they get away with anything.
It does look like they've been
Jack,
put through the tumble
fantastic to have
dryer
you with
and given
me
a good
again.
press.
I'm going to pick you up on some of those things, and we will have a little segment called Let's Pick Jack Apart. Let's pick on Jack Apart. We'll get on to that next week. Yeah, I'll go, mate. No worries. You know I will do that. Fantastic to have you along here for Hard Hats and High Vis. Thank you, listeners. And if you've enjoyed our rubbish for the day, as I said before, just at the front end of the program, drop us a line, let us know, give us a rating on your podcast app, and you can get hold of both of us, really, on the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com, or you can just hit me up in the DMs in Twitter on @JackTheInsider. Good on you, Jack. We'll catch you next week.
Cheers, mate.